Off here, and we will have some folks join us as we get moving forward. Thank you all for coming. The webinar this beautiful early, late morning here in New York State, which is a glorious spring day. We're going to talk about when AI loses the room, and what we're really going to be talking about is the interface between humans and large language models. And we're going to talk about this in the context of advertising and marketing, but I suspect we shall travel a little further afield. Victoria, would you be willing to give me a slide, dear friend? So we are joined today by two blazingly bright luminaries. Jasmine Presson, Chief Strategy Officer for Mediaplus. As many of you know, Mediaplus is a gargantuan global ad agency based out of Germany with offices servicing clients around the globe. Jasmine, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Pleasure is all mine. We also have Sudhir Venkatesh, the founder of Interact Labs, professor of technology studies at Columbia University, and for those who don't know, also ran trust and safety at both Meta and Twitter from time to time. So, Sudhir, thank you for taking the time to join us. Glad to
Thank
have
you.
you, bro.
Great to be here.
I must say, after the Knicks performance last night, I am on an all-time high. I am your host and moderator today, Tim Rich. I am the CSO of Akkio. And for those of you who don't know, who came on in, Akkio is AI infrastructure for marketing and advertising. And we create the foundational component parts that help our clients automate workflows at global governance, enterprise scale with full AI observability. So we'd love to give you a demo of that, but that is the end of my shameless plug because we have far more interesting things to get into. But what good's a webinar without a shameless plug? Okay, so we are going to start and we're going to go into the interaction between humans and AI. And we're going to start broad and we're going to go a little narrower. I'm going to do a quick fire rapid fire, hot take, rapid fire. Call it what you want. It's going to be hot and it's going to be rapid. Jasmine, your first question.
Yes.
AI, artificial intelligence, is this a global or a local problem? What do you think?
It's both because everything local ends up having global ramifications and vice versa.
Love it. Love it. Sudhir, global, local, what you think?
Every failure I've seen starts local, one population, one context, and then spreads.
Ooh, bump. Okay, next one. Jasmine, AI, is this a human challenge or is this a technological challenge?
I'm sorry, cop out, but like the same answer. It's even if it's a technology problem, it's only really a problem if it becomes a human problem too.
Love it. Sudhir, what's your take on this? Humans, machines?
I'm going to say it's a human problem. The technology does exactly what we tell it to do, and that's usually the problem.
Mm. I know, we're too good for ourselves. Okay, interesting one. Jasmine, can a business mandate AI adoption?
I believe it can't, I mean, and anyone can mandate anything. It's a question of whether a company is putting in the effort to set up systems, the systems of training, system of incentives, et cetera, to gain adoption of it. Because unfortunately, I don't think we rise to our ambitions. We fall to the level of our systems.
Mm.
So it's not the mandate, it's the system for adoption that really matters.
Sudhir, how do you see this? How do you think of business? Is it an adoption, a mandate? Can we force it down? Can we make it happen?
I would say that we can force adoption, but we can't force trust. And without trust, adoption just becomes compliance.
Hmm.
Very different
Interesting.
outcomes.
I am going to come back to that because I have a spot for that. I love that nuance. Okay. Now that we've got our engines warmed up, we got our topic set. Let's get into some meat of this. Jasmine, I'm going to start with you. Hey, you are the chief strategy officer for a massive media and advertising company. What is AI starting to mean for your teams internally? And then how are you starting to see the perceptions of it as you
Mhm.
travel around and talk to people around the world?
Yeah. So there's this um, kind of there's a lot of AI that's already in what we do because there's so much of it built into all of the platforms that we're operating on, right? Like the algorithmic nature of trading, of media decisioning in Google and Meta and TikTok and Trade Desk, all this, right? So there's kind of the media activation component that is already there and established and that we've had to become comfortable with, right? And there the proof is in the pudding in terms of the performance results that it's getting. I think it's like the how we interact with AI in a more direct way, right? So using Copilot in our day-to-day, experiments with Claude, et cetera, is whereas it's a different kind of model. And we've been focusing a lot on how we gain adoption by focusing primarily on where our friction points, pain points, loss of momentum and efficiency in the work, loss of efficiency and momentum in like people's will or motivation to do the work, and focusing first on those areas in terms of adoption of AI solutions, whether that's in reporting, data
Mhm.
analysis, project management, et cetera. So we're starting very much with where are the pain points for the humans and focus there first with AI as a solution to a tangible problem in their day-to-day work life. And that's really helping with adoption, but it's not like adoption just for adoption's sake, right? To them
Yeah.
or to us, because all of us are seeing gains in our work happiness, our productivity, our quality of outputs, pride in your work that
Hmm.
comes from incorporating AI tools into those processes.
Sudhir, you do a lot of work with Interaction Labs kind of at the C-suite level, thinking about designing these systems to come in there. What are you seeing? What are you hearing at that other side of the adoption spectrum? What are you hearing from your clients?
Almost everyone I'm speaking to isn't asking whether AI is good or bad for them. They're asking whether it will understand them. That's kind of the secret question underneath. And that's a different question. And it points to something we don't often talk about because these agents that we're using aren't really conventional products. A hammer works the moment you pick it up. An agent has to earn the right to be used. Trust has to come first. And trust doesn't come from accuracy alone, which is, I think, where we've been focused. And I think
Mm.
a lot of leaders are starting to understand that, it comes from the agent behaving like it knows who it's talking to. The systems being deployed right now don't do that very well, not because the tech is wrong, but because nobody specified what the understanding was supposed to look like for that system in that particular context. So I think that's the main question that I get is that they treat it, though it's synthetic, they treat it as though they're incorporating a living, animate entity and wondering, is it going to understand us? That's an incredible projection that I hear a lot.
To follow up on that, where have you seen currently the AI human interface work well? Have you seen any spots where this understanding has manifested itself or maybe by default kind of showed up?
Yeah, I was working with a healthcare company in Japan and Korea that ran into a version of this. Most mental health and wellness platforms deploying agents in those contexts, they use a Western model built on direct emotional disclosure. So the agent listens for someone saying, "I'm anxious, I'm struggling," etc. But in a lot of those agent contexts that they work in, people might say something through different somatic language. "I'm just so tired lately," or "I don't want to let my family down." Right? Not saying anything wrong, and the agent necessarily isn't trying to, the agent sometimes is far too direct. It just needs to understand how to calibrate its tone. So once those shifts occur and you can start to work on the agent as an interactive partner,
Mhm.
then you enable people to open up because you're building that kind of trust and taking the tone. That's where I see it working well. Not that hallucinations and safety and toxicity aren't incredibly challenging issues, but when you focus on tone and trust and enable the agent to read the room, I think you go much faster than you usually think you can.
Jasmine, have you seen spots of where it's working well, like particularly with these teams? And I know that you really deal at often at the tactical level of
Mhm.
delivery and quantification of success. Have you seen component parts that seem to be working?
Yeah, it's interesting because anything that is based in an LLM is allowing us to like speak as humans to it, which I think creates, Sudhir, what you were talking about, this need to almost establish a relationship with it, and the type of trust that has to be built between humans, as opposed to like the way we would normally trust like an inanimate object. And so the places we've seen the most success is where our colleagues are um, self-aware of the fact that they are the way they speak to the LLM is going to impact the way it speaks back. And really thinking about the psychology of themselves, of the client partner they're working for, and helping guide the
Mm.
LLM in terms of the persona they're dealing with, right? So like giving them the same way, like, if you were prepping a salesperson for a
Mm.
conversation with a client and you knew some background on them and you give them like some watch outs, some things they like, this, that, whatever. The more that we're adding that to the way we engage with the LLMs, the more immediate trust we have, the better results we're getting out of it. So there's been a lot of training, and we actually have some more training and a hackathon coming up that's focusing a lot on our prompting,
Mhm.
right? Thinking about like what are we trying to use this tool for? What problem are we
Yeah.
trying to solve? And then like what kind of prompting and what kind of context is required for us to get what we need out of it.
Ooh, I love that. That is a perfect segue. It's almost as if you knew the flow of this. It's incredible. You're prescient. I'm super interested then in look, mainstream models are built in the US,
Mhm.
right? Like the massive amount of the foundational models, there's a lot of fire coming out of China as well, but they're built with this US point of view and Western point of view. How, Jasmine, are you seeing this like evolve into different communities? Like
Mhm.
what happens when you take the foundational model made in the United States and apply it in Germany, for example?
Right, right. No, you have to give it a lot of context in terms of how
Like
people.
different context, like different types of stuff, like
Well, yes, I mean to some degree, it's like the different psychology and slang and this, the way that people like in my world like still interact with media, the media they consume and the way they interact with that media, the media they trust, the influencers they do or don't trust, like all those dynamics are not necessarily universal.
hmm
So there's a lot of understanding in terms of cultural nuance that's required for the models to be able to accurately interpret data, for you to chat with data, even if it's the same data set, like, global web index, where you have the same data set, or Statista,
yeah.
it's the same data set, same question asked in all markets, the way that we're having to train our analysis agents on the cultural nuance in terms of interpreting those numbers in one
Mm.
market versus another, because not everyone sees the world the way Americans do. So I think that's a big part of it. And then also, I always come back to like self-awareness, and understanding and exploring, being open to where our own biases and blind spots might be. Like I heard the story the other day about it was an app, an AI app to help farmers in Africa with watering their plants, like understanding how much water to give them and this and that. And it's all predictive algorithms based on, they go out every morning, they take pictures of the plants, it tells them what to do. And when they launched it into market, they started getting all these complaints from female farmers that it wasn't working for them. And luckily, there, the team that had developed this AI was very curious and open. Like they were like, "Man, what did we get wrong? Why isn't this
Yeah.
working?" They got really curious. They did a lot of research and discovered that all the training had been done with male farmers, and female farmers go out later in the morning than male farmers do. Male farmers get up and go straight out into the fields, whereas female farmers have to get like the kids off to
Yeah.
school and prepare breakfast for everyone and this and that before they go into the fields. And plants look different at 10 a.m. than they do at 6 a.m. Because plants aren't just
Wow.
like the same old, they
Yeah.
change overnight, they blossom during the
Yeah.
day. And so they had to retrain it because of this like bias they didn't even realize was in the testing set. So I think we're never going to get it perfect. It's about having the humility to understand that there's always going to be some sort of biases, some missing context, and we need to have processes for identifying identifying those things where it's like this isn't working like we thought we would, like we thought it would. There's a problem here, and then diagnosing the issue and making adaptations.
Oh, excellent example. Sudhir, down at the interaction level, I know your work at Interaction Labs is really at that point of human meeting AI, whether it be through a chat interface or through this app, for example. What kind of stuff have you seen as you've started to use AI and interface with individuals around the world and in different communities?
I think the biggest lesson for me is you start before the build. Most teams tend to treat cultural awareness as a calibration problem. You launch, you see what breaks, you adjust, a standard kind of a product marketing approach. But by the time you're adjusting, the logic is baked in legally, organizationally, it's all in the code base, and the cost of fixing it will just compound. So what I think you want before a line of prompt engineering gets written is you need to sit with that population a little bit. And I think Jasmine's example is a great one. I would just offer another one where I worked for Strava, and they had a framework that was really built on performance, athlete discourse, metrics, PR, training loads, et cetera, technically excellent. As they went around the world for a new market, under 35 women new to fitness, the agent kept pushing that language into conversations, but the users weren't thinking about their fitness in numbers. They were thinking about identity, about bodies changing, about carving out time between work and family. The agent couldn't hear that. It interpreted that as vague, as ambiguity, as commitment anxiety. And in turn, the individuals experienced it around the world as the agent not seeing them. The fix wasn't the tech. It was going back upstream and saying, what does actual behavior look like for this person in this culture, in this moment, in this relationship? And that's where I think cultural awareness shows up for the end audience, is when they feel like the agent was made for them, not just personalized, right? That's just memory, but made for them as interacting with them in a relationship.
When we are thinking about agents made for them, and like, are are we reflecting back to them the cultural nuances that they carry into the conversation, or are we trying to kind of inform? Like, does the tail wag the dog, or does the dog wag the tail? What's the interaction play between those two?
For me, Tim?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Please do.
Yeah, I almost think, yeah, it's a chicken and egg problem, and I don't think it matters where you begin. I remember
Mm,
working with a company, and their solve was just to get the agent to start with an apology every time that there was ambiguity. So they wrote into the code base that anytime that there's two decisions that have equal weight, start with, I apologize, but I think I'm going to offer you a couple different ways of thinking about it. Hope that's okay. Just the fact that they began by saying that they were themselves, the agent was themselves unsure because it had a number of competing alternatives,
yeah.
set context and set expectations for individuals to be able to imagine this person is really caring for them, trying to earn trust above and beyond making their life easier by providing the right technical content.
Hmm. Interesting. Jasmine, on that idea of apologies and like having spent a little time in advertising, you know, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. How would you think about AI apologies and like clients using, for example, a Media Plus interface AI? Like,
Mhm.
how would you want your greater business projected outwards through these tools?
Yeah, my initial response is to say I feel like there's being being in client service. I think we have a high obligation to our partners to do curation before anything gets to our client partners, so that we are able to uh, personally make the apologies if they're necessary, but also provide the context where there's ambiguity. I feel like I'm someone who had studied theater and always come back to the very first improv game you learn in improv training is yes and, right? And this
Uh-huh.
idea that I feel as humans there are A lot of people are very uncomfortable with dialectics, with paradoxes, with the idea that like opposing truths can both exist at the same time. And they're
Hmm.
uncomfortable with the answer is almost always all of the above, just to which degree, right? And that there's a lot of weight and responsibility and accountability for like your own judgment in making decisions sometimes. And I think for us, that's the place that we put our colleagues in as in some ways like an interface in between the AI and our client partners is
Yeah.
bringing the context and the human judgment when there are multiple good options, which one should we proceed with?
Yep.
Sometimes it's a human judgment call, right? And we want to put our colleagues in conversations with our client partners about the pros and cons of multiple good options to
Mm.
help our client partners and provide clear recommendations on which one we think and why, and then engage in conversation that allows our client partners to get, quite frankly, out of like analysis paralysis and decision paralysis and have the confidence to move forward with something, which I think is becoming increasingly a challenge when we have kind of always on planning cycles.
Yeah.
Kind of gone are the days of, you do your annual plan and you set it, and you implement it, you have a post-mortem, you make the next year's plan. Like we're in constant optimization mode, which can make it really hard to have confidence in making bigger strategic decisions. So I think it's about the multiple layers of relationship involved.
I love that idea that you of the client service as this interface to help the client partners
Mhm.
sift through the madness. Could
Mhm.
a person theoretically imagine a world where it would almost be a specific client partner agent that interfaces with the client and then an internal agent under different circumstances that might behave differently?
Uh, Perhaps. I mean, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I feel like every business at the end of the day is still kind of a people business.
Hmm.
And unless we're trying to get in the business of just like pure SaaS, where our client partners are in relationship with our software, I would like to keep humans in the loop. And I do also believe that, as we were discussing in the our kind of like pre-meeting before we popped over here into the webinar, that there is we're able to continuously like push the point of diminishing returns up incrementally over and over and over again when we create this loop where AI is able to reap efficiencies because of capabilities beyond like number crunching our minds can do and such, and reveal new insights to us. But then there is human intuition, human experience, human application of the insights surfaced by the AI that then helps us retrain, adjust the AI, and bump the curve up again. So it's that I think we have to keep humans in the loop to be able to unlock like the kind of infinite potential of AI. Otherwise, it will hit a point of diminishing returns if we're not in constant engagement with it.
I love that. In constant engagement with the AI, Sudhir, I know that you do a lot of thinking around how we help AI read the room, how we help think about responses and these feedback loops to better dial them in. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about your method and how you approach thinking about dialing in and moving these up the curve, as kind of Jasmine was describing? Ooh, you're on mute, my friend.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, and I'll use an example. The main way I think about reading the room is that less as a feature that you can add and more as a specification problem before you build. And I find that most teams building agentic systems, as well as working with foundational models themselves, pay far less attention to specifying what interaction that they really want up front and then
Hmm.
calibrating against it. And that's the part I think that engineering teams and product teams often miss. Look at it a different way, which is there's a difference between memory and learning. We are obsessed with memory. We think it's all about memory because it's a business efficiency problem. It's a cost problem. Memory is longitudinal. The agent remembers your name, your history, your preference, etc. But learning is very different, and that's what we should be thinking about more. Learning is the agent recognizing how you want to be treated. Learning is the agent understanding your communication style, when you want to be challenged versus supported, how you signal discomfort. That requires a very different kind of architecture and a very different set of evaluation criteria. That's reading the room. And it's really not built into the way we think about these kinds of synthetic human machine agent relationships now. I worked with a team that was building an enterprise agent that was serving legal, product, marketing simultaneously, same data, with completely different expectations for how that information should be packaged and delivered. The engineering team initially, when I was working with them, resisted building a learning function. Just 2 or 3 questions up front to every new user, just said that enabled them to get some immediate feedback to create that loop on how they would want to be treated. They said it would create friction. Every single user responded positively to that. Just a slight, a moment where the agent turned from this inert object to something that looked like it was paying attention to that individual in that relationship. And that's the room being read, right? It's not anything fancy. It's often making the person feel like they have a very personal relationship to this robot. And this is the kind of work that we do in the labs, is we find that there are just 10 dimensions of turn-taking norms, trust signals, how people handle ambiguity, how they repair and apologize. These are invariant across cultures, these 10. They shift a little bit. Someone in different parts of the world may want to experience apology in a different way. But once you have that structure, you can specify what that relationship should look like in that context.
Do you think that with those 10 invariant ways that we communicate, are we actually starting to create an 11th by doing this, by the introduction of the ability to have a feedback loop that learns? Are you seeing, kind of, as people are working more closely with AI in their day-to-day, in their world, in their jobs, that we are creating another mechanism, like my relationship to the AI? Right now, it's very designed, but I could see a moment where this becomes something more organic and something that builds and grows together. Do you kind of see that as it's taking shape a little more? More people are using AI?
I think part of the challenge for us will be trying to find the fastest path into understanding these kinds of relationships with machines. And there are really amazing people, Kate Darling at MIT, thinking about how we train animals and whether that's an interesting context. Sherry Turkle, looking at some of her original work, looking at the first nursing robots and how, when they came to the side of the bed just to deliver medicine, people experienced this uptick in health and faster recovery. As and it was just a robot replacing a nurse, and there were all sorts of interesting ways in which people were able to feel like they had someone that was so dependable and just made for them. People are not always projecting onto inanimate systems around them, stuffed animals, robots, all these kinds of things, right? So we're very good at making, inanimate objects feel like they're animate and real. And I think we need to just think about those kinds of basic tools when we start thinking about dimensions. Is why is it that there are certain ways in which we will work very well with the systems around us? And they're very simple, and they're about trust, and they're about the kinds of relationships that we want. And I think if we focus on that, we'll be able to work much more quickly and efficiently in these more complicated spaces.
I
Yeah,
love it.
I think we're also really good at projecting on other people,
Mm.
not just inanimate objects, but right, this is one that, as we're talking about with our team and thinking about it with our agency, it's figuring out where is it a lack of will versus lack of skill? Because I think a lot of the challenges we see with like AI being able to read the room is like there are a lot of people who are not great at reading the room either, right? And so for me, it's always like, how do we find models or patterns from one place and apply it somewhere else? And so in a weird kind of way, the more that we like anthropomorphize the AI, the easier it is in some way because we're able to take relationships, like human to human relationships, and use it as the analogy for what's going on, between the human and the robot, which being able to interact with them in natural language has really changed. We're not having to learn how to speak robot. Robots have learned how to speak human, but we still need to train them on all the relational stuff that we have to train humans on as well.
Well, this is an excellent one. I want to talk a little bit to this, Jasmine, about how you're bringing this down onto the ground, right? Like
Mhm.
bringing AI into the cultural context. Hey, are you getting asked by clients to hone AI yet for different markets or different clients or different brands?
Um, So, so I think that the place that our client partners are most actively involved, which is honestly true for everything within advertising, is with creative, because the ads
Yeah.
ads are so much more tangible than the algorithms that are distributing files that turn into ads showing up in places. Just like consumers are not really like aware of the media plan that sits behind it; they just see an ad, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They just see this awesome
So,
thing.
exactly. Like we're the plumbing for distributing the water, but people don't care about the plumbing. They care about the water, right?
Yeah.
And the quality of the water. So I think with our client partners, honing AI to understand their brand voice, to understand their consumer. For example, we have a product, Persona AI, where we create like um, synthetic kind of like people that
Yeah.
you can interact with, do in-depth interviews with. It you can either chat or literally speak on a video call with and I don't know if you classify it's probably not an agent, but like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but it's, I guess like an agent that is pulling from data you have on this consumer audience of yours, campaign data, this, that, whatever, right? And those things that are tangible ways, seeing the creative output. One of our AI labs, Silverside, did the Coca-Cola holiday spots the past 2 years, the Svedka dancing robot spot in the Super Bowl this year. So
Yeah.
those kind of tangible ways of applying AI to create an actual asset are the places that we're seeing clients like first focus on the honing in. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not entirely sure how much of the kind of like plumbing on the back end with the media they like fully had a mental model for understanding to begin with. So on a media side, a lot more of it is around data analysis, data visualization, creating dashboards where they can chat with the data and really humanize the data.
Sudhir, this is fascinating. Humanizing data, like it at one time is an oxymoron, and at the other time it's absolute accuracy, right? Because data is a human artifact. Uh, Sudhir, in your work with individuals and with data and with AI, are you seeing different ways of communicating, like numbers? We're like always taught that, like, oh, numbers are numbers, it's just the mathing out. But is there actually mechanisms of more successful communication patterns for numbers?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I think we fail to really get and appreciate the relationship between number and story.
Mm,
That numbers exist in a narrative, right? And that's where all the power comes from, is the story or the narrative around any kind of number. There's unfortunately, Aura, the health app is
yeah.
experiencing right now with their Ring. You can see it all over online. In a recent, they have an AI advisor, and a user caught their health advisor, their agent, in what it felt to be like a factual error, and the agent just couldn't acknowledge it cleanly. The company's response attributed the problem to a user perception. Nobody lied, nobody hallucinated, the data
Yeah.
wasn't being challenged in other way, but the user walked away feeling that the system had kind of closed ranks on them.
Interesting.
It could have just apologized. It could have just owned up and explained a little bit and been more transparent. That's not a UX problem. That's a trust problem. That's not a data problem, right? That's a story about how a company has to rethink how it presents data to people in different contexts. Sometimes walking things back, sometimes repairing,
Mm,
sometimes admitting the ambiguity, sometimes saying that we're not quite sure what to recommend, or here are different options, or call your doctor, whatever it happens to be. But the
Yeah.
data will always come with stories around it. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that we sometimes presume that just by giving people raw data, it kind of speaks for itself. Data can be very intimidating,
Yeah.
especially from people who build these systems and then present someone with a dashboard and says, here's your data, here's your life, here's your work, here's what's happening in your area of the world, right? That looks like it's being helpful, but often it's really just making things more intimidating and more challenging.
Yeah, and even when
Jasmine,
people
yeah.
are data fluent, at the end of the day, we're dealing with end users who are humans, who are not completely logical and rational and are paradoxical. And we almost need to train the AI like we do people in relationships and like couples therapy and stuff. It's like, do you want to be right or do you want to stay married? Do you want to stay in relationship, right? And sometimes like we just need to be like, this other person's perception of this situation, like the fact is the fact, but our perception of it, the reality it creates for me and this other person are different things. And I just need to accept that, right? So I think there's again, like it keeps coming back to like understanding people, and how do we better understand ourselves so that we can create technology that understands us as well.
Where does the rub live, Jasmine, between building trust in the systems that we are putting out into the world for our client partners and simultaneously this like assignment of failure, right? Like in
Mhm.
the Aura Ring example, it was like, well, hey, that was user error. Our stuff's fire. Like math was right. Right. And but if we
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I'm sorry about that. The math was wrong and the AI got it wrong. Are we tanking trust a little with these systems? Like, how do you kind of thread that?
Yeah. I think it like everything in life, we have to be really clear about what we want, right? And do we want to be right, or do we want users to stay engaged with our apps? And if we want them to stay engaged with our apps, like then it becomes clear there's some places where humility, apology, transparency about ambiguity, like needs to be part of the interaction the same way it would in human relationships, right?
Yeah.
There's like all the kind of adages or whatever about how the more kind of like the more self-aware and the more intelligent a person is, the more they say, I don't know. Right. And so like we need to get AI more comfortable with saying, I don't know, but here's some ways we can proceed together to figure
Mhm.
this out, right? Like having potentially more like collaboration and teamwork in the engagement rather than it feeling servant and master or director and associate or like
Mhm.
those kinds of dynamics. We are social beings. Our survival up till now came from our ability to work together and understand our not like codependence, but our dependency upon each other for our mutual survival. So it only makes sense that if that is our kind of foundational psychology, that to make AI really sticky and to make it really successful in terms of
Mhm.
working with us. Because again, like, does it need to be sticky? Do we need to have it? Like
Yeah.
that's a whole other conversation, right? But if we do think there are advantages to using it, and so we want to use it, um, I think there's figuring out how we train people to see it more as a teammate, and train it to see itself more as a teammate in collaboration with us as well.
Hmm. So, dear, as you're building systems and you function really deep down at the architectural level of the chat and the interface between humans, I see AI often as a like a repository of knowledge, like a godhead. Like all the human knowledge is packed into this thing, and I can teach myself jet engines tomorrow if I choose. How do we approach these AI as source of information in the workplace and source of collaboration? Because right now we are coming to it to an answer. But what Jasmine was describing in this work relationship is that role as answer machine might not be as powerful in another context. How do you think about that at like the workplace level, down at the brass tacks?
You know, I think the challenge with a lot of these LLMs is that when used ineffectively, they cement the assumptions that you're already bringing in, and they just make them louder and more dangerous in a way because you're inadvertently giving control over to this machine. I was working with this creative agency and they were using an LLM to develop a whole bunch of campaign concepts for a financial services client. And the client wanted to target first generation immigrants who were building household wealth for the first time, right? Very noble cause. The model had been trained and prompted on all the agent's existing work, right? Hundreds and thousands of documents, and everything was sophisticated and ironic and culturally self-aware in a very, very specific way, right? That agency, that register just didn't land with that audience of these first generation immigrants. It actively signaled that the product wasn't made for them. The model wasn't wrong about financial recommendations, technically incredibly accurate. It was wrong about the relationship that that audience needed to have with money. That was serious, trustworthy, it was tied to family obligations, collective responsibility, not individual aspiration. Right? And then, the creative director noticed that and said, well, why wasn't this in the brief? And the unfortunate problem was that nobody fed into the LLM a brief that included what that relationship needed to be like. What it fed was the competence and capabilities of the creative team in the past in terms of what wanted awards or what were successful campaigns, presuming that if it was created really, really well, as they had done in the past, it was just a minor calibration problem in terms of getting it to this new population. Agencies don't need better models. They need better relational architecture. They need upfront thinking, and I think it's of the kind that Jasmine was talking about, that's much more human, empathic, and sensitive to the sorts of nuances of relationships, and less about the efficiency, or less about the kinds of things that you would, the global kinds of patterns that you would emerge just by looking at past incidents of how you've done.
That is really interesting that now we're kind of starting to think about moving on the front foot. So the previously was right, pack it in, right? How are you seeing like people moving forward with this? It's not better briefs because that's more of the back foot again, right? That's just like, oh, let me just put some more back stuff into it. Are you seeing different types of usage in humans? Are you seeing us adapt to this tool that's making better outcomes?
I, I mean,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it is actually, though, better briefs, and it's forcing us to have to think through what are the, um, it's not the word I'm looking for, is not accommodations, but what are the compensations that
Mm.
humans were bringing to the process that we never documented, that we now have to understand,
They
right?
were latent then
They
this
were,
whole time.
yes. What were the latent compensations that humans were bringing to the process? That if we're handing parts of that process or all of that process over to AI, that we need to bring into it, and that's actually like a much better brief. A brief that has a lot of the context that was actually latent context needs to become explicit, right? So I think it is a better brief, which requires us to be better at briefing.
Mm.
It requires us to be better at training the AI to be as good or better than we are at training other humans, right? In terms of the amount of context, the skills, maybe the method we train it may need to be different. It may not learn through like story and allegory the way that humans do, because we learn through story, and I'm not sure that's always the way that the AI is going to learn best. But it really, again, it comes back to like us really stepping back and understanding what is not only conscious but unconscious and overt versus latent in our processes right now, so that we can bring that into our process with AI.
With our old briefs, were we expecting that latent human to fill those gaps?
I think I'm sure we were, there's a lot that I think was going unsaid there are a lot of things that were said that were quite frankly like BS. Like, we always talk about how like there's the brief and then there's the secret brief.
Yeah.
And like the way you win the pitch, the way you make great work is by like understanding a person's secret brief, which, as someone who studied theater, I think about like not taking at face value what my character does and says and how other people interact with them in the script, but like what is underneath there, like going like 7 layers deep into it. And we've got to do that with like kind of investigating everything.
I love it. Okay, we've had an amazing chat. I want to give a moment for some Q&A from our friends on the phone, so to speak. I think to kick off the Q&A, I just stated quickly some four key takeaways. One, hey, we are as deep in culture as we are in tech. And right now we are talking a lot about tech in the mega log, but really I think what was come out of this is that this is fundamentally a cultural puzzle as well, if not more so than a technological one. I think Jasmine and Sudhir both really focused on that we have to take an active role in defining the culture of your AI because frankly, it's going to be defined for you. There is no bench to sit on. There is no opt out. The other one is that we've seen jagged models, right? Models that have greater or lesser strengths and greater or lesser camps, right? And it's that judgment that helps us align the jaggedness of that model to take its strengths and double down on them, or to step in and human in the loop them to be able to put them at the side and bring that thing that makes humanity so awesome to the fore. And I think I put this one at the end just because
Mm.
I'm banging on this drum. AI is not artificial, right? This is a product of something that's read everything on the internet that was created by humans and it was built on a neural net, which is a function of human brains. Like, this isn't artificial. This is an extension of what this thing is that we are living in, humanity. So, with those kind of thoughts, I want to throw it out here for some questions. Let me take a look here. Let me bip on over. As one of them gets dropped in here, I have a quick question that was texted to me on the side. Sudhir, someone texted me and they wanted to know how you quantify interactions. You mentioned a 10 rubric, and they asked if you would talk just a little bit about the way you think about quantifying human AI interactions.
Yeah, there's a there's a time and a place for quantification, and I think it's understanding the difference between quantification and evaluation. And sometimes we get those two incorrect. Like there's all sorts of ways in which quantification will lead to a kind of a systematic understanding of what it is that we're looking for. Sometimes what we're really looking for is an evaluation. So for relationships and for agents, I think what we need to understand is that we're looking for things that are not just measurable in quantitative indicators. Like does the agent acknowledge? Does the agent repair? Does it trust? Does it read the room? These things are often demanding a kind of evaluation of cultural specificity, goodness of fit, social interaction fit, that is very different than quantification. I often just take a clients' KPIs and just turn them right back to them. And they often, almost always in LLM space, depend on conversational continuity. If that person is continuing a conversation with their agent in your workplace, or a customer is continuing a conversation with your chatbot, that is almost always a sign of success. If they return, that is a sign of success. It is very simple, and it's all about relationships that we're in. So the reason I do it like that is because sometimes what people are doing with quantification is that they're creating a one-size-fits-all way of evaluating a relationship with a consumer. And we want to be, I think, a little bit careful of that when we're thinking about relationships as opposed to, use patterns.
I love it. Jasmine, hey, this came in. How do you start making the case internally for investigating cultural nuance when leadership is so focused on speed and scale?
That's such a good one. I
I
mean, I
know a
think,
zinger, right?
and I know, no, it's good. It's good though. So I think a lot of it is looking at one way of looking at could be looking at trying to quantify and evaluate, which might be like more qualitative, but anywhere we can have numbers, it always helps. The opportunity cost of not doing it. So what is
Mm,
either going to be the friction and slowness in terms of adoption, and therefore the amount of energy that has to be pushed into the system to try to gain adoption? Or is it opportunity cost in terms of vulnerability to and risk, right? In terms of getting things wrong,
yeah.
lawsuits, this, that, whatever, especially for like creative agencies, right? So I think it's bringing it could be either what we have to gain, or what is the opportunity cost, or some combination of those two. But I think for leadership, that at the end of the day, it comes down to numbers, and either what is the gained or lost productivity, what is the amount of additional investment that has to go in to compensate, and therefore extends the kind of like investment that's required to gain adoption of these tools.
I love it. Sudhir, hey, question from the ether. What's the first thing or an early step that an agency should do if they want to audit their AI for cultural blind spots? How do we even start that process?
I think that's an excellent thing for people to do, to go back and to look. And this is actually where I think you can do a lot of great work with. You can make a lot of great use with simulations and with LLMs. Is to start feeding in and having the kinds of situations that you've identified as a problem or you've identified as a failure, and trying to establish some pattern recognition and start simulating examples of what different outcomes would have been if you started conversations a little differently, or if you adjusted your tone or recalibrated things. Often what I think, do in auditing, especially in the creative work when we're field where we're working with products and trying to get good product market fit, is we take a jobs to be done relationship when instead we should think about a relationship to be created. Like taking the same kind of product and thinking, what are the different kinds of relationships this product could create with this audience, rather than what are the different problems it can solve, or the different functions it has, or the different utilities that it could, create or offer. And
Yep.
that's a different kind of audit, I think, because it's asking you to think about roles and identities and give and take. And so you have to get people out of one kind of audit framework, which is, pretty powerful right now, and into a framework that's more about auditing a relationship. And I think that demands its own kind of approach to figuring out what went right and what went wrong.
Yeah, I would also say that there may be an opportunity for auditing the biases of your talent as well. Because if the AI is going to amplify the biases that already exist in the people in your organization, then evaluating biases within your organization is also an important part of that.
Could we, and I just want to follow up on that from a global advertising point of view, a biases is also could be cast another way as a cultural nuance.
Hmm.
How do you kind of start to think about biases and cultural nuance in these two?
Yeah. Yeah, so all of our global toolkit is being developed by a team that some part of it, sits in our headquarters in Germany, but our chief global data officer, Karen Immenroth, has built a very global team to ensure that the cultural biases and the marketplace biases of our kind of home office in Munich don't have outsized influence on
Mm,
the tools that we're creating, and that there is, UK and Chinese and American and French and, folks from Dubai, that there is a breadth of cultural experience and marketplace dynamics that are feeding into the development of those tools.
that's incredible. Is there also component parts? How are you thinking about rollout of those tools?
Hmm. And that is something where a lot of there's a certain amount of like top down from our global team to the managing directors to the leaders of each of our market offices. But then the market offices are very hands-on in the rollout to the colleagues. within their office. So there is that layer of local nuance that is a combination of kind of the market culture as well as like that individual, like any group of people, any little
Yeah,
community is going to have its own kind of organically self-organizing culture as well.
for sure.
So like no two independent ad agencies of 100 or 200 people in New York City are going to be exactly the same in terms of culture, right? So having the local leadership playing a very large part in the rollout of those tools, again, helps as being like an interpreter between the global objectives and intention behind these AI solutions and the actual local team and local clients and those dynamics playing a big part in how it's rolled out.
That's great. That's great. I got one more final question, Sudhir, that plays on this global rollout. Um, Oftentimes in the agency setting, AI is taken up by highly sophisticated individuals who are drinking at the fountain. Sudhir, how do you think about bringing everyone along with this? Because there's knowledge that's contained in all of these people that's absolutely untapped. Like, as your role thinking about that, how should we, as people who are in charge of standing this up, think about bringing everyone along, or maybe extracting the good bits? Or how do you think about these different levels of sophistication in this puzzle?
One reason I love working with creative agencies is going back to something that we talked about earlier, which is that everyone understands the power of story. Everyone understands the power of one single case that transformed them. Maybe it was a user, maybe it was something they read about. That's where I think that something is getting lost as we incorporate these kinds of systems and these kinds of agents in our workplace, is that we forget the power of a single human story to help us unlock what we are looking for with a campaign, with a fit of a product, with a way to position it, etc. So I think some of the best creative directors that I've met and some of the people in the agency world that I often turn to are people who clear the room of data and start thinking about repopulating the room with stories and repopulating the room with narratives of meaning. Like, how is it that this is going to help a user get from point A to point B? What is the way that they're going to wrap an entire mythology around this? Right? And what are those concepts and symbols that they're going to bring to bear to make it come to life? That's what I think that's what I grew up with when I think about advertising and the creative world. And I think we need to bring some of that back in.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to just kind of nerd out with me today. Jasmine, Sudhir, it's been a distinct pleasure and honor. Um, I would really love to do it again. And the next one, let's talk about something totally different, like birds or rocket ships, which will have everything to do with AI, of course.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our friends on the phone for hanging out with us today. I hope this was a lovely time and you had as much fun as I did and learned as much as I. Once again, this is Tim Rich for Akkio, signing off. Thanks again, friends.